On November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, Portland International Airport was packed with families heading home, soldiers in uniform returning for the holiday, businessmen rushing to finish last-minute work before the weekend. The terminal buzzed with voices, rolling suitcases, and the distant echoes of boarding announcements. In the middle of all that ordinary chaos walked a man who would eventually become one of the most mysterious figures in American history. He was tall, neat, and composed. Dark hair, combed carefully. He wore a black business suit that fit perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a thin black tie. In one hand, he carried a plain brown briefcase. In the other, a tan raincoat folded over his arm. His shoes were polished. His posture was straight. Everything about him said normal, safe, predictable. The kind of man you'd see 1,000 times and never remember. He approached the ticket counter and asked for a one-way ticket to Seattle. No rush, no emotion. His voice was calm and controlled, the kind of voice a businessman might use when talking to a client on the phone. The clerk asked his name. He replied, "Dan Cooper." Nothing about the name was unusual. The ticket printed. He paid in cash. He simply turned and walked toward the gate. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. He slipped through the system as if designed to be invisible. On Flight 305, he took a seat in the back section of the plane. He placed his briefcase gently by his feet and relaxed into the cushion. Around him were everyday Americans, a young couple speaking quietly about family plans, a salesman flipping through pages in a notebook, a mother humming to her small child. Someone laughed. Someone coughed. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fuel. Cooper ordered a bourbon and soda from the flight attendant, a woman named Linda. She noticed his polite tone, his soft smile. He thanked her as she handed over the drink. He lit a cigarette and took a slow sip, looking like a man who had nothing to worry about. But behind that calm exterior, something else was happening. While everyone else was thinking about turkey dinners and holiday traffic, Cooper's mind was running through a plan he had probably thought about hundreds of times. He had studied details, imagined every step, every second on that plane. He was measuring time, distance, reactions. His eyes were relaxed, but his brain was sharp, alert, calculating. He pulled out a small note, folded, simple, unthreatening. When Linda walked by again, he gently placed it in her hand. It looked like a phone number or a private message. She smiled automatically and tucked it into her uniform pocket without reading it. He leaned slightly closer and spoke in a whisper that was almost kind. "Miss, you should read that. I have a bomb in my briefcase." Those words, spoken so quietly, carried the weight of a storm. Linda froze. She slowly unfolded the paper. Inside were careful handwritten words, straight and steady. He demanded $200,000 in cash for parachutes and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. There was no rage in the writing, no messy emotion, just simple instructions, like a shopping list. Her hands trembled. She looked back at him, and for a moment she expected to see madness, anger, desperation. Instead, she saw calm. His eyes didn't shine with excitement or fear. He almost looked bored. He gently tilted the briefcase open just enough for her to see what was inside. Wires. Cylinders that appeared to be dynamite. A battery. Whether it was real or not, in that moment it might as well have been the most powerful bomb in the world. "Everything will be fine," he said softly. "Just do as I say." In that instant, the ordinary man disappeared and the legend was born. But here's what made Cooper truly terrifying and fascinating at the same time. He never once raised his voice. He never hurt anyone. He never panicked. While the pilots in the cockpit were tense and sweating, while authorities on the ground were scrambling, Cooper sat calmly in his seat, sipping his drink, as if nothing unusual was happening. He wasn't acting like a criminal. He wasn't acting like a madman. He was acting like a man in complete control. The airline contacted the authorities. The FBI became involved. Money was being gathered. Parachutes were located from local skydiving clubs. The entire city of Seattle was slowly becoming aware that something unreal was happening in the sky above them. But inside the plane, for most passengers, nothing had changed. They felt a slight delay, some unusual waiting on the runway when they finally landed in Seattle, but they had no idea they were part of a crime that would be written about for decades. And Cooper, he watched it all unfold without even standing up. He observed the movement of people, the reactions of the crew, the time it took for things to happen. He wasn't nervous. Instead, he almost seemed to enjoy watching the system bend around his will. When the plane stopped in Seattle, the passengers were released safely. One by one, ordinary people stepped off, unaware that they had just unknowingly walked out of history. Outside, in the night air, trucks rolled up carrying bags of cash and parachutes. Cooper had received exactly what he asked for. Most criminals. From the outside, nothing about the plane looked unusual. Night had fallen over Seattle. The runway glowed beneath the rain, and the aircraft sat quietly on the ground like any normal flight, waiting for passengers to continue their journey. But inside, the atmosphere had completely changed. The cheerful holiday mood was gone. The passengers had stepped off. The doors had closed again. Now, the only people remaining on the plane were the crew and the man who calmly controlled everything. D.B. Cooper didn't pace. He didn't sweat. He didn't show fear or excitement. He sat in his seat, like someone waiting for an appointment, watching the movement outside through the small square window. Police cars gathered at a distance. Their lights flashed silently in the dark. Officials moved around, communicating in urgent voices through radios. And yet Cooper remained strangely peaceful, as if all of this chaos was exactly what he had expected. The money arrived in a simple bag. The parachutes were delivered as requested. Everything he asked for was handed over without resistance. That alone was shocking. A single man, with no confirmed identity, had frozen an entire city's authorities into careful obedience. But it wasn't brute force that made them listen to him. It was something else. It was his control. The crew members were shaken. The pilots exchanged nervous glances in the cockpit. Flight attendants tried to keep their breathing steady, their hands from trembling. But every time one of them spoke to Cooper, he responded with politeness. He said please. He said thank you. He never insulted them, never treated them with disrespect. In a strange way, that calm kindness made the situation even more unsettling. There was no emotional chaos to blame, just cold, organized thought. While negotiations and logistics played out on the ground, Cooper continued acting like a passenger rather than a criminal. He adjusted his seat. He asked for a second drink. He even offered one to a flight attendant, like they were simply sharing an ordinary evening thousands of feet above the ground. It was surreal. Linda, who had been closest to him from the beginning, watched him carefully. She noticed the small details. He wasn't young, but he wasn't old either. Somewhere in the middle. His hands were steady. His voice never cracked. He looked like someone who had lived a disciplined life, maybe military, maybe aviation-related, but there was no clear sign. Every part of him was carefully neutral, like a man who had trained himself not to leave fingerprints on the world. As the plane prepared to take off again, the pilots were given new instructions based on Cooper's demands. The weather outside was brutal. Wind howled across the runway. Clouds covered the sky in thick, angry layers. Anyone normal would have felt fear at the thought of flying back into that darkness. Cooper didn't even look bothered. The engines roared, and the aircraft rose back into the sky, carrying with it a bag of ransom money, multiple parachutes, and one of the greatest mysteries America would ever know. Once in the air again, Cooper began giving further instructions to the crew. He was exact in his words, but never aggressive. He knew what he wanted and how he wanted the situation to unfold. In his mind, this next phase of plan was already written. The rest of the world just hadn't caught up yet. He told Linda and the other flight attendants to stay in the cockpit with the pilots and to lock the door. They were confused, frightened, but they listened. One by one, they moved away from the main cabin. With every step, the distance between them and Cooper grew. The man in the suit now stood alone in the back section of the aircraft, surrounded only by darkness, wind, and the sound of the engines. For the final time, Linda glanced back at him. He stood near the rear of the plane, his back half turned toward her. The bag of money sat heavy at his feet. The parachute was close by. His tan raincoat hung on a seat, forgotten or perhaps intentionally left behind. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no smile, no frown, just a look of final decision. and then the cockpit door closed. Inside the cockpit, the crew waited. Every second stretched into eternity. The plane rocked slightly in the storm. Rain beat against the wings. Silence filled the space where Cooper had once been. Then suddenly, there was a powerful jolt. The plane shook as if something heavy had shifted or moved. A warning light flashed red. The rear staircase had been lowered. For several long, terrifying seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The sky outside swallowed sound. Somewhere behind that locked door, Cooper had made his final move. He had chosen the exact moment, the exact place, the exact darkness, and then he was gone. No one heard a scream. No one saw a shadow fall. No one felt the moment he disappeared into the storm. The only proof that anything had happened at all was the open staircase, cutting through the night air like a door into nothingness. A man had been there seconds before, and now he simply wasn't. When the plane finally landed again and authorities rushed in, Cooper was nowhere to be found. His briefcase was gone. The bomb was gone. The money was gone. The man himself was gone. All that remained was the echo of his presence, like a ghost that had brushed past reality for a moment and then vanished. And as officers stared at the empty cabin, the open rear stairs, and the rain-soaked night beyond, one question began to spread through the entire country like wildfire. How could a man walk into a plane, control everyone without violence, and then disappear into the sky without a single trace? In that moment, D.B. Cooper stopped being just a hijacker. He became a legend. By the time the plane touched the ground again, the truth had already started to settle in. The man called D.B. Cooper was gone. The storm outside had swallowed him whole. And somewhere in the wilderness below, darkness stretched for miles in every direction. Authorities moved fast. The FBI, state police, local sheriffs, and military units all came together as one giant operation. The landing wasn't even fully complete before phones were ringing, orders were being issued, and maps were being spread across tables. Everyone wanted the same answer. Where did he go? They studied every detail the crew could remember. His height, his voice, his movements, everything, no matter how small, was written down. The way he held his drink, the way he crossed his legs, the exact words he used. They searched the aircraft from front to back. They took his fingerprints from the armrest and the seat, but the results brought no name. The fingerprints matched no one in their systems. It was as if the man had never existed. Outside, the storm had left the countryside wet and treacherous. Teams were sent into the forests, across rivers, into muddy fields, and through cold mountain paths. Helicopters hovered low over the trees, their lights cutting long white lines through the dark. Men in rain-soaked jackets marched across the land, looking for broken branches, footprints, pieces of fabric, any sign that a human had touched the ground. But the land refused to speak. Days turned into weeks. The search stretched into distant areas nobody had expected. Every time someone found something unusual, a piece of cloth, an abandoned shoe, a scrap of metal, it caused a ripple of hope. But each time, after careful testing, the object proved to be nothing related to Cooper. The Earth kept its secret hidden. Then came the first twist. A small discovery, made by pure accident, changed the nature of the entire case. Years later, a young boy playing near a river uncovered old, damaged packets of money buried in the sand. The bills were worn, stuck together, and marked with serial numbers that matched the ransom. It was the first real proof that Cooper had touched the ground. The news shocked the nation. If some of the money had ended up here, what did that mean? Did he survive the jump only to lose some of the cash in the rushing water? Did the river take it from him? Or had something happened to him in the darkness that nobody had imagined? The discovery didn't solve the mystery. It made it deeper. Now the world's imagination exploded with theories. Some believed Cooper was a trained skydiver who had disappeared easily into the green ocean of trees, walking away to begin a brand new life under a different name. Others said he must have died upon impact, his body swallowed by the wild forests, never to be found. A few even believed the whole act was part of a larger, hidden plan, that someone else had been waiting on the ground to help him escape. People all around America began to claim they knew who Cooper was. Tips flooded the FBI. Old neighbors reported strange men. Former co-workers whispered about quiet loners who had suddenly vanished in 1971. Every few months, a new suspect appeared in the headlines. One man was a former soldier known for his skydiving skills. He had disappeared shortly after the hijacking, leaving behind unpaid rent and unanswered questions. Another was an obsessed aviation fan who had studied that exact plane for years. A third allegedly confessed before dying, claiming he had always waited for someone to figure him out. But none of the stories could be proven. Fingerprints didn't match. Timelines didn't align. Witnesses changed their stories. The truth slipped away like fog in the morning sun. Every time the mystery seemed close to being solved, it slipped out of reach again. Linda, the flight attendant, was asked multiple times to look at pictures of suspects. Face after face was placed before her. Some looked similar, some didn't, but she refused to lie to satisfy curiosity. She trusted her memory, and her memory told her one simple truth. The Rael Cooper was not in those photos. Years passed, then decades. The world changed. Technology advanced. Cities grew. Forests shrank and expanded. But still, the legend of the man who jumped out of a plane into a storm refused to die. It became more than a crime. It became a myth. Songs were written about him. Movies and books used him as inspiration. He became a symbol of rebellion, intelligence, and danger, all wrapped in the face of a calm, unknown man. Even the FBI, after investigating the case for decades, finally had to make a decision. They admitted something rare, something that showed just how powerful the mystery was. They closed the active investigation, not because it was solved, but because it couldn't be. No body was found. No proven identity was confirmed. No solid conclusion ever stood tall enough to end the story. D.B. Cooper officially became a question without an answer. And perhaps that is what makes the story so haunting. He didn't leave behind a name. He didn't give the world a face to remember. He didn't stay long enough to be understood. He came from the ordinary world, stepped momentarily into history, and then vanished into the unknown, like smoke in the wind. Somewhere out there, perhaps under the soil, underwater, or under a different identity, lies the final truth of what happened that stormy night. But to this day, it remains hidden from us all. And that unanswered silence is the loudest part of the entire mystery. As the years rolled forward, the world didn't forget D.B. Cooper. In fact, the mystery only grew deeper, like a shadow stretching longer with every passing sunset. The name Cooper became more than a man. It was now an idea, a question hanging in the minds of millions. And behind closed doors, in quiet neighborhoods, in small American towns, and in forgotten corners of the country, people began to wonder, had Cooper ever really left? That question slowly turned into suspicion. In one quiet Oregon town, an old mechanic named Robert Lane caught the attention of investigators. Robert was a lonely man who kept to himself, rarely interacting with neighbors. After the hijacking, he had suddenly moved into a remote house at the edge of town. He paid in cash. He never explained where the money came from. He never spoke of his past. He simply existed in silence. People said he walked through the woods every evening, staring at the horizon as if searching for something that had once been lost there. But years later, when his home was searched, nothing was found. No parachute, no marked money, no evidence that linked him to the sky at all. Only a quiet, empty life filled with unanswered questions. Then there was another name, the name that stirred even stronger curiosity. Thomas Andrews, a former paratrooper who lived in Nevada. He loved aircrafts. He spoke about planes with a kind of deep personal connection. Some people said that, on certain nights when he had been drinking, he would smile to himself and say strange words like, "Some men don't fall. Some just disappear." After his death, letters were found hidden among his belongings. They were never sent. They were written to no one in particular. Only one line stood out. "The sky forgave me. The earth did not." The sentence chilled those who read it. Was it a confession? A metaphor? A desperate cry from a lonely mind? No one could say for sure. And without proof, his name also faded into the growing list of possible Coopers that would never be confirmed. But the mystery was no longer just about where the man went. It was now a psychological puzzle, What kind of mind could do what he did and never be heard from again? Was he a criminal? A genius? A broken man? Or was he simply someone who believed the world owed him more than it had given? Psychologists and investigators studied his calmness during the hijacking, the way he spoke politely, the way he ordered his drink, the way he showed respect to the flight attendants instead of anger. This was not the behavior of a violent man. This was the behavior of someone in complete control, someone incredibly calculated, or someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. Some experts believed Cooper did not want fame. He didn't want to be known. He didn't leave a manifesto or make a speech. His crime was quiet, clean, and haunting. It was like a final performance, carried out in silence. And that silence was far more frightening than any gunshot. Newer technology arrived. DNA testing became more advanced. Computer systems grew smarter. The hope returned once again that the truth would finally be uncovered. Tiny pieces of evidence, collected from the plane, were re-examined. Hair fibers, fabric threads, old fingerprints, all were tested once more. Yet even now, the results came back incomplete. Unknown. Unmatched. It was as if Cooper was a ghost, someone who had passed through reality without ever truly being part of it. The theories began to evolve. Some people began to believe that Cooper never intended to survive. They believed the money wasn't the point, that the jump itself was the real end. They imagined him standing at the open door of the plane, staring one last time into the storm, accepting whatever waited for him in the void below. Others believed the exact opposite. They believed he had planned every detail perfectly, practicing for months, studying maps, learning weather patterns, calculating every possible variable. That when he landed, he walked to a hidden location, changed his clothes, buried evidence, and stepped quietly back into society under a new name, blending into crowds of ordinary working men. What if the man sitting next to you on a train had once been D.B. Cooper? What if the old man buying groceries had once jumped into history? What if he lived a normal life, had a family, laughed, cried, and died as an ordinary citizen? These thoughts haunted people. The story became legend. Parents told it to children like a haunted fairy tale. The man who fell from the sky and was never seen again. Students studied it in classrooms. Writers made it the center of novels. Each new generation added their own imagination to the puzzle, creating a modern myth that refused to fade. And yet, among all the rumors, witnesses, suspects, and shadows, the truth stayed buried. Not in police files, not in evidence boxes, but somewhere deep in the American wilderness, where the rain falls without memory and the trees stand tall as silent guards. The longer the mystery lived, the more it transformed. It wasn't just a crime story anymore. It was a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in a world of cameras, satellites, and endless surveillance, a human being can still disappear completely, if he chooses to. And that thought leaves the most unsettling question of all. If Cooper could vanish without a trace, then how many others already have? Years went by, and the world kept spinning, but the mystery of D.B. Cooper refused to fade. It sat quietly in the background of American history, like an open book that had lost its last page. New crimes happened. New headlines replaced old ones. New legends were born. But somewhere, beneath all that noise, one question never died. Who was he really? As decades passed, the idea that Cooper had lived a secret life began to feel more real to many people than the idea that he had died in that cold, stormy wilderness. Because no body was ever found, no parachute ever discovered, and except for a few decayed bills located near a riverbank years later, the $200,000 seemed to vanish just as completely as the man himself. Somewhere in America, men who had once been young in 1971 were now old. Their hair had turned gray. Their hands had grown shaky. Their eyes had seen too much life. And among them, some had secrets heavier than time itself. One of those men was Charles Whitman. He lived in a quiet neighborhood in Montana, far away from the chaos of cities. He had no children and rarely spoke to family. Most people described him as distant but polite, a man with a past he never wanted to explain. In his garage, he kept an old wooden chest locked with a rusted metal clasp. He never allowed anyone to open it. When he died at the age of 79, Curiosity finally won. A neighbor who had helped clean the house pried the chest open. Inside were old maps, hand-drawn routes, newspaper clippings about the hijacking, a wine-stained airline ticket stub from Portland dated 1971, and wrapped in a faded cloth, a bundle of decayed currency with serial numbers that matched some of the missing ransom money. The police were called immediately, but there was a problem. Charles Whitman had no fingerprints in the system before 1975, no record of where he had lived before then, no confirmed employment history. It was as if he had appeared from thin air just a few years after the hijacking. Then came the final blow. Tucked between the papers was a small handwritten note. Some stories are not meant to be finished. Some men are not meant to be found. There was no signature, no confession, no name, only riddles. Was this Cooper? Or someone obsessed with him? Was it a dying joke? Or the final piece of a silent, hidden life finally trying to speak? Investigators wanted to confirm it, but time had erased too much. The bones of the past were too scattered. DNA testing failed due to age and contamination. Even the paper had degraded almost beyond recognition. It was like history refused to give up its final secret. And maybe that was the point, because Cooper was never a man who wanted to be known. From the way he dressed to the way he spoke on the plane, everything suggests that he had controlled every detail. Even his escape was planned to leave behind mystery instead of certainty. It is believed that if Cooper survived, he would have chosen a simple life, a job that did not draw attention, a home that blended in, a face that meant nothing in a crowd. He would not have spent the money carelessly. He would have used just enough to survive, never enough to raise suspicion. Maybe he fell in love. Maybe he sat on a porch watching sunsets. Maybe he worked with his hands and lived quietly until the end, his greatest secret buried deep within his chest. And as he grew old, maybe, just maybe, he smiled sometimes when the name D.B. Cooper came up on the news, knowing that the world was still searching for a ghost that had been sitting beside them all along. But then there is the other possibility, the darker one, the idea that Cooper died that night, that somewhere beneath miles of trees, mud, and river, his remains lie hidden forever, reclaimed by the earth, that the storm claimed him, that the wilderness swallowed his daring plan whole, that the money scattered, the parachute collapsed, and the legend was born only because his body was never found. If that is the truth, then Cooper did not vanish into society. He vanished into silence. And sometimes, that silence is more powerful than any answer. It turns a man into a myth, a mistake into a masterpiece of mystery, a crime into a legend that outlives generations. Today, there are still people searching, still people who gather clues, still people who believe they can unlock the final secret. But the older the case gets, the more it feels like the truth has chosen to stay buried. Maybe Cooper is not meant to be found. Maybe the world needs a few mysteries to remind it that it does not know everything. And maybe, just maybe, the real genius of D.B. Cooper was not in the hijacking itself. It was in the disappearance. In a world that demands answers, he became the ultimate unanswered question. A man who stepped off the edge of reality and into eternity. And as long as there is no final proof, no clear name, no confirmed ending, he will continue to exist. Not in flesh, not in bone, but in whispers, in theories, in stories, in legends, and in the quiet corners of everyone's mind that secretly wonders, what if he actually got away with it all? ChatGPT can make mist,